Bon appetit is a French expression, much like please or thank you, good morning, good evening, said when serving a meal or sitting down to eat, or even when getting up from the table while others are still eating, or when someone is leaving to go to lunch or dinner. Bon appetit is used to tell someone that you hope they enjoyed their meal. Literally, in French, good appetite. Well, 7 Sundays ago, on September 8th, opening day for the World Champion Patriots, we kicked off this sermon series which looks at the practice of the spiritual disciplines. You may recall, I quoted Donald Whitney, who writes in Spiritual Disciplines for the Christian Life. As people who claim to follow Jesus, we are called on to do something that we wouldn't normally do. Practice spiritual disciplines in order to be more like Jesus. Whitney goes on, which I didn't quote to you, the only road to Christian maturity and godliness, being more like Jesus, passes through the practice of the spiritual disciplines. So, we set out to learn more about how to practice these disciplines. Not just to rehash the classic disciplines, to go where we've gone before, but to discover new frontiers, to go boldly where we haven't gone before, to explore the more unconventional disciplines. And yet, this morning, we close out this sermon series by looking at one of the more classic of the disciplines, fasting. In a culture of convenience, where you can have it your way, where some people believe that the individual should choose for themselves what is right and acceptable, where others say moral and ethical absolutes are obsolete, fasting may be the most countercultural, least practiced, most feared, least understood of the disciplines. Cornelius Plantinga writes, self-indulgence is the enemy of gratitude, and self-discipline its friend. The early Desert Fathers believed that a person's appetites are linked. Full stomachs and overstimulated palates take the edge from our hunger and thirst for righteousness. They spoil the appetite for God. That's why I'm greeting you this morning saying bon appetit. May you have a good appetite for God. May you crave the things He craves. That's why we're closing out this series by looking at the classic discipline of fasting. But how to practice it in an unconventional way. The kind of fasting God chooses. Ron is going to read the passage for us.
Isaiah chapter 58, verses 1 through 12. Shout with the voice of a trumpet, class. Tell my people Israel of their sins. Yet they act so pious. They come to the temple every day and seem delighted to hear my laws. You would almost think this was a righteous nation that would never abandon its God. They love to make a show of coming to me and asking me to take action on their behalf. We have fasted before you, they say. Why aren't you impressed? We have done much penance, and you don't even notice it. I tell you why. It's because you are living for yourselves even while you are fasting. You keep right on oppressing your workers. What good is fasting when you keep on fighting and quarreling? This kind of fasting will never get you anywhere with me. You humble yourselves by going through the motions of penance, bowing your heads like a blade of grass in the wind. You dress in sackcloth and cover yourselves with ashes. Is this what you call fasting? Do you really think this will please the Lord? No. The kind of fasting I want calls you to free yourself, free those who are wrongly imprisoned, and to stop oppressing those who work for you. Treat them fairly and give them what they earn. I want you to share your food with the hungry and to welcome poor wanderers into your homes. Give clothes to those who need them, and do not hide from relatives who need your help. If you do these things, your salvation will come like a dawn. Yes, your healing will come quickly. Your godliness will lead you forward, and the glory of the Lord will protect you from behind. Then, when you call, the Lord will answer, "Yes, I am here." He will quickly reply. Stop oppressing the helpless and stop making false accusations and spreading vicious rumors. Feed the hungry and help those in trouble. Then your light will shine out from the darkness, and the darkness around you will be as bright as day. The Lord will guide you continually, watering your life when you are dry and keeping you healthy too. You will be like a well-watered garden, like an ever-flowing spring. Your children will rebuild the deserted ruins of the cities. Then you will be known as a people who rebuild their walls and cities.
Thank you. And Carol with glasses. So what's the kind of fasting that God chooses? Let's go to the text and see if we can find out. God tells Isaiah, "Shout it aloud, do not hold back. Raise your voice like a trumpet. Declare to my people their rebellion." God is using rebellion here, not in the sense of trying to overthrow a king or ruler, but in the sense of an offense or wrongdoing. God is pointing out to Israel their sins and transgressions, which, come to think of it, is rebellion against God. It's trying to overthrow God's authority in our lives. God commanded Israel to observe one fast a year on the Day of Atonement, called Yom Kippur in the Hebrew. This was the holiest of days for Israel. The fast required humility to come before God and confess sins and disobedience. The fast emphasized the people's humanity, that we need sustenance constantly, food and water for life. And the fast reminded the people that they are dependent creatures on God for guidance and wisdom, for blessings and protection, and on one another in the community, because the needs of one person for life cannot be supplied by themselves alone. And though God didn't command it, His people observed fasts at other times and in various ways. Like Moses, who fasted from both water and food for 40 days while he met with God on top of Mount Sinai. As did the prophet Elijah later. Both of these were supernatural fasts because they required the intervention of God, because no one can survive much more than 3 days without water. Daniel observed a partial fast, refraining from eating the royal foods and drinking the royal wine, and only eating vegetables and water, to show that he could survive on that God would supply his needs. And Ezra observed a personal fast, a one of mourning for the unfaithfulness of the exiles as they returned from Babylon. And King Jehoshaphat called for a national fast, for guidance and protection at the threat of war. And Esther called on the Jews, all the Jews in Susa, to observe a 3-day fast from both food and water, an absolute fast, before she approached King Xerxes to tell him about Haman's disobedience or his manipulation. Because the queen never approaches the king. She always waits to be called. And in the New Testament, Paul observed a 3-day fast after Jesus appeared to him. Jesus is God, on the road to Damascus. And of course, Jesus, who observed a 40-day fast from both food and water in the wilderness as he prepared to begin his public ministry. And incidentally, many presidents have called on Americans to observe a day of fasting, like John Adams when threatened with war with France, Abraham Lincoln 3 times during the American Civil War, and Woodrow Wilson during World War I, and as you can see, many other times in our history. Jesus never commands us to fast. He just assumes that we will. Look and listen to what he says about fasting in the Sermon on the Mount. When you fast, but when you fast, not if you fast. And he uses similar language earlier in the passage when he talks about giving and with regards to praying. Few of us would question whether we should give or pray. But what about fasting? The fact is, fasting is mentioned more in Scripture than baptism. 77 times, 70 to 75 times. So, as good Baptists, we would never question whether we should be baptized. What do you think? Should we practice fasting? Of course, God's charge against Israel isn't because they are not fasting on the Day of Atonement, but because their fast is not the kind of fast God chooses. The people ask, "Why have we fasted and you haven't seen it? Why have we humbled ourselves and you haven't noticed?" They honestly believe that they are doing the right thing. Day after day, they go to the temple. I think we could safely assume that they also are praying and reading the law and the prophets and the other writings. They likely memorized Scripture. They seem eager to know God's ways, eager for Him to come near to them. They bow down before God like a reed in the wind. They put on sackcloth and lay down in ashes. Writes commentator Amy G. Ogden, the people seem to believe they are doing the right thing, and it is God who is not being faithful. They think by fasting they will please God and earn His favor. So, when they ask for righteous and just decisions, and He doesn't answer, when He in fact rebukes them, they are genuinely confused. Like the person who took out a subscription for a major national newspaper. They wrote to the editors, "Dear sirs, when I took out my subscription last year, you stated that if I was not satisfied at the end of the year, I could have my money back. Well, I'd like my money back. On second thought, save yourself the trouble. Just apply it to my next year's subscription." Or the parents who wrote this letter to their daughter's teacher. "Please excuse Harriet for missing school yesterday. On Sunday, we forgot to take the paper off of the porch, and when we found it there Monday morning, we thought it was Sunday." Or Chicago Mayor Richard Daley, who defended the actions of the police during the 1968 Democratic Convention, saying, "Now get this straight once and for all. The policeman isn't there to create disorder. The policeman is there to preserve disorder." The people seem to think that fasting is a transaction with God. If they do the right things, then He will have to fulfill their prayers and desires. But God's blessings are always grace. not because he owes us anything or is indebted to us for anything we have done or ever could do. Fasting is not, nor are any of the spiritual disciplines, a means to get God to be more receptive to our requests. Fasting is, as are all the spiritual disciplines, a means to make us more receptive to God's requests. Fasting is replacing hunger for food with hunger for God. Fasting is about loving the blesser more than the blessings. Richard Foster writes, in celebration of discipline, fasting is feasting. Feasting on God and on His Word and on His desires. Fasting that creates in us an appetite for God, that helps us to crave the things He craves. This is the kind of fast God chooses. God answers the people. You cannot fast as you do today and expect your voice to be heard on high. Our loving God confronts His people with the truth. Their fast is not only self-serving, but it is oppressive, violent, and divisive. Outside of not eating or drinking, meeting the minimum requirements, they do what they want to do. Like Scrooge, they make their employees show up all the earlier the next day at work to make up all the work that was missed on the day of the fast. Perhaps not eating, and not drinking has made them irritable, tired, so that they argue with one another, even come to blows with one another. Their fast is false and fake and phony. They are hypocrites. Like the member of the Missouri legislature who accepted a $25,000 bribe in exchange for his vote on a certain bill, but returned it when he got a $50,000 bribe from the other side. When asked in court why he returned the $25,000, the legislator sat up straight as high as he could on the witness stand and in a voice that clearly conveyed his displeasure with the question, "How have you know I'm too conscientious to take money from both sides?" Or the congressman who spoke before the House of Representatives and said, "This is the most ill-informed, wimpy, backstabbing argument I have ever heard. This that was just uttered by my respected colleague, the distinguished gentleman from Ohio." Or the Sunday school teacher who is trying to impress on his junior high class the importance of living the Christian life. He asked them, "Why do people call me a Christian?" There was a moment's pause. Then one of the teens ventured, "Maybe it's because they don't know you." Observed one commentator. The people in Isaiah's day had the same problem as the Pharisees in Jesus' day. They practiced empty religious rituals apart from spiritual reality. Like the Pharisee in Luke's Gospel, who stands at the front of the temple praying and boasts, "I fast twice a week and give a tenth of all I get." God sees through empty actions and practices, through just going through the motions, which is always a danger when practicing fasting or any of the spiritual disciplines. Even for us, in worship? Do we sing Sweet Hour of Prayer and are content to pray 5 to 10 minutes a day? Or do we sing Onward Christian Soldiers and wait to be drafted into his service? Or do we sing Serve the Lord with Gladness and gripe about all we have to do? Or I love to tell the story and never mention it at all. Or the whole wide world for Jesus and never invite our neighbor to church. Fasting that creates in us a hunger and thirst for righteousness, an appetite for God, is what God calls an acceptable fast. God says to the people, "Is this not the kind of fasting I have chosen? To loose the chains of injustice and untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free and break every yoke? Is it not to share your food with the hungry and to provide the poor wanderer with shelter? When you see the naked, to clothe them, and to not turn away from your own flesh and blood, to do away with the pointing finger and malicious tongue." The kind of fast God chooses is a fast from the sins of commission. Those actions we take that we shouldn't, like injustice, treating your employees and workers like animals, like they are oxen with a yoke around their neck pulling a plow. Plato said to do injustice is more disgraceful than to suffer it. Or what about oppression? Using our position or our privilege, even admitting that we have privilege, to dominate others, to bully them. Or accusation and manipulation, blaming others, malicious talk, slander, gossip, lies. The kind of fast that God chooses is a fast from the sins of omission, actions we should take that we don't, like sharing your food with the hungry, providing the homeless with shelter, clothing the naked, sharing the abundance of our blessings with others. Because this is God's distribution plan. He blesses others through blessing us. The kind of fast God chooses is unconventional. It's not really about not eating or not drinking, or fasting one day, or fasting only in times of national crisis, or fasting only to mourn, or fasting even as a weight loss program. The kind of fast God chooses is a whole new way of life, as Amy Ogden writes. It's a daily fast, so that we will crave and hunger for the things that God craves and hungers for, like justice, and forgiveness and reconciliation, and grace and mercy. This is the kind of fast God chooses. So, what spoils your appetite for God? Is it your job? Partisan politics? Supporting the Red Sox, the Patriots, the Bruins, or the Celtics, or another sports team? Or TV? Watching endless talk shows? Or edgy comedies or dramas? Or what about your cell phone? Or trying to fill out your bucket list? Or even the cry of my generation: sex, drugs, and rock and roll. May I offer a suggestion? I have up here little slips of paper, which I'll put up back. But if you feel so called, because we are not commanded to fast, nor is it supposed to be coercion. But if you take a slip, it looks like this, and fill it out, and give it to someone you trust, someone who will hold you accountable. And fast, just one day a week, from whatever it is that you write in that line to the right. And say it's TV. Then take whatever you pay for your cable or satellite bill for one day a week. And I know it can be pretty high, $5 or $6, and save it. Or if you write in there, calling someone a name, responding in anger, getting into an argument, then penalize yourself a certain amount, $1, $2, whatever you choose, and put that away also. And then, at the end of the year, give it to something that God cares about. Maybe one of the missions our congregation supports. Maybe building the mission house in Ghana. Whatever it is that God calls you to give it to. And maybe you'll fast from not inviting your neighbor to church. And if we do this, if we spend ourselves on behalf of the hungry and meet the needs of the oppressed, if we seek justice and forgiveness and reconciliation and grace and mercy, then our voices will be heard. And our light will rise in the darkness, and God will give us guidance and lead us always. Because that's fasting the way God chooses. The Apostle Paul writes to his young protege, Timothy, have nothing to do with godless myths and old wives' tales. On the other hand, discipline yourself for the purpose of godliness. And Vance Havner writes, the alternative to discipline is disaster. We are God's agents in this world, the hands and feet of Jesus. People who have been redeemed by Jesus' sacrifice and then sent back out as God's partners to help fulfill His kingdom. God cares about the choices and decisions we make. He cares about our moral and ethical actions, or the ones we don't take. Looking at spiritual discipline, the classic discipline of fasting, but practiced in an unconventional way, the way God chooses, is a fitting summary for this series on practicing the spiritual discipline, because in some way, all the disciplines are meant to increase our appetite for God. Whether it's putting ourselves third, after God first and others second, or practicing walking in another person's shoes to see the circumstance from their point of view, or practicing hospitality, welcoming one another, or waiting for God, remembering that waiting on God doesn't mean sitting back doing nothing and waiting Him to hand over everything to us. And celebrating, encouraging one another, like Barnabas, and fasting so that we will crave what God craves. Bon appetit. May you have a good, great appetite for God and crave what He craves. Amen.